and they are funded separately out of the school finance formula. So those should just be distinguished. And then it has kind of a brief at the end, kind of the main topics of the task force guidelines. And then again, I'll note that in the footnotes, there is a link to kind of the guidance as well as the main webpage that the Department of Education created for the continuous learning plans. So there's more information on there, and I will pause there for questions.
Thank you. That was perfect, Norma. Do we have any questions from the committee? I am not seeing any questions. So if you do, you can always check back in with Norma at a later time for those questions. All right, great. We're going to move ahead on our agenda.
This is Representative Johnson, Madam Chairman.
Yes.
I was trying to put something up. I'm sorry.
No problem.
With your permission, could I ask a question?
Yes, please.
You cited several things from this study. So you're just simply giving us what the task force gave out. Is that correct, Norma?
Yes, Madam Chair, Representative, this is really just kind of a very broad overview of why continuous learning plans were implemented and what kind of started that process. So the task force was from the Department of Education, and they kind of spearheaded the idea of guidance, recommendations, all of that. So this doesn't include their specific recommendations. The guidance is like 80 pages long. I didn't feel the committee necessarily needed to see me read through that, but you can find it online on their website. This is just a very broad, continuous learning plans were implemented because the governor closed schools due to COVID. The legislature responded by requiring continuous learning plans to allow for schools to waive the 1,116 hour requirement, and then a very broad definition of what continuous learning plans are.
Okay, my comment, because I was teaching at that time and I was faced with following all these guidelines, it was very, very difficult. This is just a comment as much as a question. Why did the governor close the schools?
So that is actually, Representative Johnson, more of a political question, and you could probably get a dozen different answers regarding that. And hindsight 2020, all of that it's easier for us to make judgments now. We are very glad that public schools had the opportunity to be open in August and September, as long as their individual school districts allowed for it to be in person. So I'm very, very pleased with that. But in terms of the political question, I think we'll move from that and maybe take that offline. Does that sound good?
I withdraw that question, understandably. It's just been a long fall, and I quit teaching as of the 31st. So, but I thank you very much. No further.
Yes, yes. Thank you for your inquiry. And Norma, if there are no other questions, we'll go ahead and move on. And again, it was an excellent introduction.
Madam Chair, Representative Tarwater is raising his hand online.
Oh, well, Representative Tarwater, back at you. I see it now.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm actually in the committee room today with a couple other guys, but my question is, okay, and back to kind of touch on what Representative Johnson was just talking about. If you recall, Madam Chair, when we heard the initial bill to allow for the waivers, it was to extend spring break, and we had asked several questions around, well, how do we instruct the K-12 individual school boards to act for this? And we were told in no uncertain terms we couldn't weigh in on what the school boards did or didn't do or make them do anything. It just didn't work that way. That all had to come from the Kansas Department of Education, evidently. But I kind of feel like we were more or less duped into this, because we agreed to this bill for an extended spring break that was a week or two long, and we were going to waive the number of hours required for those schools when they come back. That was part of flattening the curve. As soon as that bill passed and as soon as the governor signed it, she immediately turned around and canceled schools for the entire year. I would like an explanation on that, political or not. And I also would like to know, what is the difference between remote versus virtual, other than the fact that we decided to fund schools 100%? Thank you.
Okay, so again, excellent questions, but who did you want to refer that question to? Because I don't think Norma will be able to answer the first question.
Then I guess maybe, what is the definitional difference between remote versus virtual, other than the fact that we overpay for remote?
Well, I think maybe let's ask that question of Craig or Brad Neuenswinder. They're online. So Craig or Brad, would you like to answer that question?
You want me to start, Craig, and then you can finish up?
That would be fine.
So the difference between virtual and remote is there's two types of formulas for funding students. One is the virtual school formula, which is what we term as an asynchronous, where the teacher is not necessarily making daily contact with the student. Sometimes they do, but the student works more independently through online software platforms. They pose questions, and then some teacher, it might be a teacher from all the way across the state, might be, but it's not a teacher typically employed by the district. So it's very much an asynchronous learning environment. Remote in the pandemic is where, while the student may be working at home, they are still making daily connections with their classroom teacher, with employees, counselors. So they're making contact with the employees, their neighborhood schools, their neighborhood teachers, their neighborhood counselors, their neighborhood principals. While some of the learning is online, most of the, or a lot of the time, so the guidance we gave is that they are zooming in just like we are right here, still making contact with their neighborhood school and teacher. It's just they're not physically in the same location. So Craig, I don't know if there's something you'd want to add to that.
I think that covered it pretty well. Thanks.
Representative Tarwater, did you want to ask any additional questions?
No, thank you very much. I'll wait.
Okay, all right. With that, we're going to go ahead and go right into an introduction or overview from Craig Neuenswinder, and he is now the new Dale, so we're happy to have you in our committee. We will not call you the new Dale again. I just thought that would be fun. In preparation for this committee, I had requested a list of different documents or things that we would like focused on. And so many of those documents have been provided to our committee and may be attached. If they are not attached, then we'll get them at some point here the next week. So I want to just give you the floor. I know we also have a guest superintendent of schools, Dr. Tiffany Anderson, which we got to meet here just a minute ago, that she will follow you. So we'll begin with you.
All right, thank you. And thank you, committee members. And I will be a little bit brief so that I can yield the floor to Dr. Anderson. I know she'll be able to answer some of your questions and provide you more direct knowledge than I can. One document I do want to highlight for you, or at least bring to your attention. You have a spreadsheet that's labeled SF21-023. That is our compilation of what districts told us in a survey was their primary learning environment through the first quarter. Now, I'll tell you, I know you're going to want more recent results, so we are in the process of asking about the second quarter, but we don't have that data completely compiled yet. We'll pass it on to you as soon as we do, though. So a little bit about the report that you do have. Some just in general, when you receive a report from us or printout like this, typically we're going to put the school districts in county order. Most people don't know all of the USD numbers, nor should they. But they're counties that they represent, know that makes it a little easier to find your schools maybe. Then on this particular survey, the columns we have represent primarily how the school district was functioning in terms of their learning environment when school started. And then the second set is at the end of the first quarter. So it may say, for instance, that Fort Scott's elementary schools were on site when school began. Well, Fort Scott has 2 or 3 elementaries, and they may have had a couple of grade levels that were remote because they had students or teachers test positive, so they had to go to remote. But primarily, they were on site, so that's how it's reported. So when you see somebody was on site, don't necessarily assume that means 100%. But at that point in time, that's how the majority of their students at that grade level were receiving instruction. And then, as I said, the second set of columns is approximately when the first quarter ended on October 30th. And we will do the same thing again to get us through the end of December, and you will have that information a little bit later. And I tried to highlight in different colors, hybrid and remote, to make them stand out a little easier for you to find. And then don't know how accustomed you are to working with spreadsheets, but at the bottom of the spreadsheet, there's another tab that says summary. And if you click on that tab, it'll give you the total for the state. When school started, there were 259 elementary or districts who had their elementary schools primarily on site, 246 with their middle schools, 248 with their high schools. And then you can move over and see at the end of the quarter how many at each of those grade levels were in that learning environment. And then we converted those to percentages below. The numbers don't always mean much, but the percentage may be helpful in some cases. And you can see that the majority of the districts were on site. Now, a number of the districts that were remote are our larger districts. So we're talking about quite a few students who may have been remote or hybrid. So I just give you that as basic information, again, with the promise that an update's coming. If you have questions on that, I would take those, and then I would yield the floor to Dr. Anderson for a little more specific information.
Okay, the chart is very, very helpful, and I think we can all laugh because I am the one that doesn't do well with the pivots in this spreadsheet. So I thank you for the instruction. May have to get some help with that later. And when you do have the update for the new semester starting in January, we would definitely like to see that. So do you have any type of initial estimates for where we are, number of school districts that have their high schools, let's say, in person? Or I'm sorry, remote still. How many are remote, do you think?
I'm afraid I couldn't give you a good answer. The majority are still on site, but I couldn't tell you other than, and you all have experienced this, so you know, the number will be different next week than it is this week. And that's true on the numbers I just gave you. We gave you 2 snapshots as a point in time. Each week in between those 2 snapshots, we would have had a different report.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to ask the committee if they have questions for you, Craig, or for Brad before we go to our next conferee. So Dr. Anderson. And then we can also come back after Dr. Anderson. Any questions from the committee? Well, I will frame our discussion, Craig, in that I believe it was Representative Hoffman and I were in a meeting talking about how states are doing with the remote learning. And we heard some really startling news. We heard that 67% of all Michigan high schoolers are failing at least one class. And that was really concerning to us. We don't know what Kansas looks like. We have heard of some school districts in Kansas that have at least a 37% reported instance where at least one class, a student is failing at least one class. So I guess some of the information that we're looking for, and Dr. Anderson might be able to help us with this, is that some of the most vulnerable kids with the highest number of at-risk students are the ones that are perhaps going remote right now. And we had a bilingual study, a post-audit that showed pre-COVID, about 76% of all students were not reading at grade level, were not reading or performing math at level. And that was after even 5, 6, 7, 8 years of being in the bilingual program, ESOL. So I think a lot of our concerns today and what we want to hear would be how many of our students that are at risk are checking it? How many hours are they going to classroom? How do we know this? How many students are, how are they doing academically? What's that failure to success ratio compared to previous years? Those are kind of what we're trying to assess. How we also have heard reports that students are at least a year behind in basic math, and that if you are at risk, then you're even further behind. So I think we're very concerned about the longer we are not in person. And so I don't know if you have any answers or response to that, or if we'll just turn it over to Dr. Anderson.
Madam Chair,
Yeah,
Representative Estes has a question online.
Representative Estes. Representative Estes, you may ask your question.
Thank you. I apologize. I forgot to unmute. I read through a lot of the documents as much as time allowed. And are you wanting us to ask questions as we go document by document, or just go with the questions that we have from what we got through?
With the way the presentation is today and with other guests on WebEx, you may ask your question in any order you'd like, because we're not going over each individual document. This is kind of just a data dump to the committee, so you can kind of get your hands on some information, and then it may be days before you're able to consider what are your concerns, what are your questions. In those instances, Craig will likely, and Brad will be likely back in our committee many times in many days, and or direct emails to those individuals, to Norma and to myself. So I'm going to just offer you, if you have a couple questions to get things going on any subject, to Craig, and then we'll see if anyone else does, and then we will go over to the presentation of Dr. Anderson that's with us today.
Thank you so much, Madam Chairman. One of my questions was along the line of yours of concern about how much information has been lost. And I read that one of the documents listed a window of when we can test. And I wondered if there's latitude to change, as in move forward, that testing window, so we can find out sooner how much progress has been lost, and classroom teachers will know where the most progress has been lost. So that's one set of questions I have. And then the other set of questions I have is the longitudinal performance level reports graph. And I was just looking at the math one. It's easy to discern which colors go with which level, but with the scale on the bottom, it's very difficult to assign a numerical measurement to what those mean. From what I gather on level 1 and 2, it looks like about 67.34, or a little over 2/3 of our students, are not learning currently the information that we're teaching well enough that they can use it efficiently and effectively in post-secondary. And 1/3 are, which is at 32.64%. So I'd like more information on that, but I would also like it to be more clear to me and probably the public on what those levels mean beyond the words that describe them. What is the numerical measurement behind them that sorts one student from one category to another? Is it a percent of correct answers? When I read that, I really still don't know, and I'm still looking for the answer. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Madam Chair, would you like us to address that today or at a later date? And if so, I believe Brad would be the more appropriate person to comment on those.
Okay, Brad, we can do both. Brad, if you're able to maybe respond to, can we move the testing dates up for spring? I'm not sure if Representative Estes is meaning the state assessment. If so, is that right? Yes. I don't know when those are scheduled, but that might be a good idea. There may be some other testing that is being done in addition, and that you could talk about. And then also the second one, what are those numerical measurements behind each of those levels? If you can respond to that, and then if you have to address it again later, that would be great too.
Great. So first, discussing the window, there's three really common types of assessments that we administer in Kansas. Formative, which is an assessment tool, and they're all developed, I'm just going to say, through KU, part of our state assessment contract. The formatives are an assessment that a teacher can grab quickly, use in a class period to measure where students are right now relative to the standards. So that's a formative, and those are free to school teachers, and they've been giving those all year long. The second set are called interims, and they were developed by Kansas teachers and working with KU, and they're given quarterly. The first set was given, I don't have the dates memorized, but mid-late fall. Again, they're not required, but they're free. And we have thousands of teachers across the state that administer those. That way they can check where students are at a point in time. They're also predictive to how a student might do on the state assessment. And a lot of our teachers have given that. School districts also give other interim assessments like Fastbridge, Ameswood. So there's a lot of assessing that goes on throughout the year that school districts use. Our first snapshot, because we just got some, and we don't, that data doesn't come to our agency. That's just between KU and the school for them to be able to use to check learning throughout the year. KU did an analysis with that, and just first glance at the first quarter, while there was learning loss, there was probably more in math than English language arts. But nationally, because a lot of our districts use national assessments like AimsWeb, FastBridge, and I'm trying to think, Maps. They have national millions of data, and their first look at the first quarter was while there was loss, it was not as much as people predicted, but the loss was more significant in math than English language arts for students that had to work remotely. So it's just kind of the first glimpse of, while we don't have a statewide assessment that was given, a lot of districts, most districts are giving formatives and interims to be able to measure where students are. So they have, and I know Dr. Anderson could talk more about what specifically they're doing locally, but assessing is going on. It's just not at the state level because our assessment is a summative. It's at the end of the year. We could move it up, but our Kansas Assessment Advisory Council was hesitant to move it up because, one, the possible loss of instruction that occurred this year, and then to move it up, you're trying to assess kids on knowledge that they most likely have not had yet. So it's basically about the same timeline, number one. Number two, the Kansas English Language Proficiency Assessment, the KELPA, opens February 15th. So schools will be administering that for about a month to a month and a half. And then we immediately move from that into the state assessment. So it's just the logistics of that. But yes, we have looked at the window, but the summative is to try and measure what did they learn throughout this entire school year. And the concern, the more you move that forward, you're assessing kids earlier on material that they most likely have not had a chance to cover yet. So I hope that answers some of your questions.
As for Representative Estes, as for your second question on the more information about the different levels, the 4 different levels, I'm going to ask that Brad provide a response to the committee that kind of outlines what those numbers, that breakdown looks like. And Representative Estes, you can also send an email. You can look on our schedule today to get the emails for Brad, Craig, myself, Roger. And if you would send that question in writing as well so that we don't miss anything. And then from there, we'll work further on understanding the assessments and how kids are doing. For right now, just know that in Kansas, there's only one required assessment from the state perspective, and that's the state assessment. All of the additional assessments are district by district policy. So with that, Representative Estes, does that sound okay to you?
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Okay, it looks like we have 3 hands up, so we're going to do those 3 questions, and then we're going to go straight to Dr. Anderson. So thank you, Dr. Anderson, for your patience, and we look forward to hearing from you. So we're going to start, I'm not sure who was first, but I'm going to go with Representative Hoffman, then Hoy, and then Tarwater.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Craig, I want to switch gears just a tad on during the interim, we heard in our JCIT meeting about some of the IT issues that the schools were having, and security issues, and through our LAP audits. And I guess my question is, talking to the school districts that were audited, they found it very helpful, but they also were a little discouraged because they did not feel like that they were getting any help coming out of the department in working through the issues that they found in the audits. And a lot of them were security issues. And they really felt like that there needed to be something from the department to going out to all the districts, kind of some best practices in some of these issues. So I just bring that up. If you could give us an idea of if you guys are working on that, and if you've been approached by those districts, and if I think it would be helpful. And is that something that you're working on?
Certainly. Thank you, Representative Hoffman. When districts reach out to us with IT questions, we certainly assist them as best that we can. Our ability to provide, for lack of a better term, overarching assistance to all the districts is limited a little bit because each district has the local control to determine their own platform, their own software programs, and how they implement those structures. So for us to provide support that would apply effectively to every district is a little bit limited without additional staff. That's simply not what we are staffed to do. We do provide assistance when they ask with the information that we know to be best. In some cases, when we learn that they're having problems, we reach out to them. So it's not just sitting back waiting for them, but that's the practice that we've been able to follow to this point in time.
Well, and I appreciate that. And I'm not really asking you to come up with, you know, I know they all have different needs and they all have different software. It's more of an issue that the districts that were audited felt like that it was a very good to go through the audit because they didn't realize that there were things that they should be doing that they weren't. And this isn't things that are really just one program. And so I guess my question is more of, I think that you guys need to look at putting together some best practices for that all the districts could look into their IT and say, okay, is this something we're doing? I mean, some of it was just simply making sure that passwords were changed on a regular basis, and you know, things like that they didn't really necessarily at the time realize how important it was. So I would just encourage you to reach out to. I know the Siemens School District was one of them, and they felt like it was a very good. To go through the audit, and they had some really good things to say about what they felt like maybe should be some best practices. So I think it would be good to reach out to them, maybe say, hey, what do you see? And then might be able to then put something together to help all the districts. So thank you, Madam Chair.
And I would second that as the chair of legislative post audit. It was very helpful to those districts. And I do think that many districts, especially smaller districts, do need some support. I know that there's been quite a bit of federal dollars that have come into the KSDE's hands in December or will be. And perhaps some of those monies could be directed towards supporting our schools in the IT arena. So I'm just throwing that out as a comment. Next question would be Representative Hoy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My son just did his math assessments in third grade, first week back in session, so I'm really appreciative of learning about these different state assessments and how they're used. And I'm wondering, because I do hear some concerning numbers of students are not proficient, and what assessments are we using to determine that? Is it the summative state assessment that all students take, or are we looking at math? Like what are we using right now, since we didn't end up doing the state assessment at the end of last year?
Right now, as Chair Williams said, the only required assessment from a state level is the spring summative assessment. But school districts, and we provided a lot of guidance in the navigating change on assessing learning throughout the year. So school districts are to be looking at what local assessments, and by local, some of them choose to use a map. Some of them choose to use the state's free provided interim. Some use, there's multiple ones out there. So actually our school districts and the superintendents can share with you here in a moment, they've been assessing learning throughout the year. So while we don't have a dipstick measure at a state level right now because we didn't give the state assessment last year, all plans are in place to give it this year. Hopefully, this pandemic, we get kids back in because you can't take the summative remotely for security reasons. So hopefully we can get them back in school so we can assess them later this spring. But it's up to school districts right now to be using their local assessments at all grade levels, not just grades 3 through 8 and once in high school where the state assessment is. That's all levels assessing where students are in learning. And that's been in our guidance, and we hear from curriculum directors, testing coordinators, superintendents, principals, that's what they've been doing. So while they are measuring it at a state level, we don't have data to share because it's being done locally.
May I do a follow-up there, Madam Chair? Thank you. So I guess what assessment? I'm still not sure what this. I can't. I'm sorry. I was looking through all this stuff when the question was asked earlier about 70 or 76% are not efficient or not proficient. So what? I'm just not sure where we're finding that information and what the basis for that is.
I just from hearing that was a number that I'm not sure it was referencing maybe something in Michigan, or I'm not sure.
Representative, did you want to elaborate?
Oh, I'm just wondering, like, having my son, I've seen his assessment and where he has been able to do. He's doing remote school entirely right now for 3rd grade. So I'm just wondering, like, is his assessment part of this? Is this a snapshot of all Kansas students? Like, what are we using as a basis to say that that number of students is not proficient?
Well, the most recent data we have as a state would have been the spring of 2019 because we were not able to assess in 2020. So if they're referencing statewide Kansas data, it would have been from most recent would have been the spring of 2019. So like I said, I'm not sure what the 70% was referencing.
And Representative Hoy, there is, when you have time, and we can definitely help you if you haven't found it, but there are accountability reports, performance reports on the KSDE website, and we can help you go through that and look at elementary. You can look at it by the district. You can look at it by the school. There's so much data there. It's definitely overwhelming. It is going to be something that we continue to talk about. So today will just be the start, and hopefully you'll have more answers to those questions very soon. We're going to go on.
Sorry. Thank you. I appreciate that. And I just do want to say, I know this is really a struggling time, a time for everybody. And my son's teacher's been out with this virus. He's had a sub for over a week. I mean, we're all struggling. So I really appreciate that we're also prioritizing wanting to keep students on track, but there are reasons why we have to respond to this public health crisis too. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And I will note, if you haven't seen it on the proposed agenda, but I believe it is next week, or the first week of February, we're going to have a special informational hearing on remote learning and hybrid learning and those challenges, those wins, those losses. So we'll have more time to really dive into it. Representative Tarwater.
Madam Chair. So I wanted to touch on the accountability. We don't have any accountability since 2018, I guess, because we didn't take the test last year. And so you mentioned that some of these districts are testing, some of them are not, some of them are using one thing, some of them are using another. What are you doing to keep track of all that, and how are you holding schools accountable for, especially in the schools that are not meeting in person? How are we doing that, or are we doing it at all?
Well, first of all, I did put in the chat a link to our performance accountability report. So if you go to that link, you can see, and hopefully this will answer some of the questions, but you'll see data by school, by district, on the performance accountability, or multiple data sets other than just state assessments. The longitudinal data report will take you to state assessment longitudinal data. Again, the last year we gave a summative was the spring of 2019. We were not able to give one the spring of 2020. By statute, or by the data privacy, we have no access and can't get access to any local performance that school districts give. While we would like to, we don't have authority to get data from MAPS, Ames Web, FastBridge. So while we don't have it at a state level, they are using it at a local level. But I did put in the chat a link to that information.
Madam Chair, can I follow up on that? Okay.
Yes, you can.
So my question is this, and I agree with Representative Estes that we should really we need to move the date up so we know where we are. We haven't had a cross-section of where our students are since 2019. Get that we didn't do it last year because the governor closed the schools for the year, so we couldn't do it. But we're back in session now, we're back in school now. Well, all of them except for one school, who by the way, has the largest ESOL percentage of students. And so we need to do this testing to find out where our students are so that we can adjust them. I mean, my guess is, for example, my kids were in school August 15th, and we're in school in person ever since. And they're doing much better than these students that are remote. My question, I guess, is why are we going to wait until the end of this school year to realize how much we're failing these students? Why are we going to wait, and what are we going to do when we find out that we're right, that these students have fallen behind? How are we going to pick them out? We're going to have these schools that did, in person the best they could, and their students will have done better. Are we going to hold a bunch of students back? I mean, these students have missed a year and a half of school. So do we put them back in the fourth grade if they were in fourth grade in 2019? How's that going to work? Because we can't start teaching them fifth grades in the sixth grade without holding everyone else back. So what's the plan there? Thank you.
So we do plan to assess this spring, and again, if a student entered the fourth grade last August, it would not be appropriate to assess them on the fourth grade assessment at the beginning of the year when they haven't been subjected to the content yet. So we will be, again, the summative assessment is designed to assess what they learned during that period of time, during their fourth grade year. We did look, and while we had many districts that were in person at the start of the school year, to take a student starting their fifth grade year and then to give them a fourth grade test that they should have taken the spring prior, and then it was disrupted with March, April, May of learning, then they had the whole summer and then come back in, and now they're a fifth grader, to turn around and to give them a fourth grade state assessment. We did not believe, one, it would be valid, but two, our system wasn't designed to give an assessment in the spring to measure a kid 6 months after they would have been exposed to the content. School districts were well positioned to measure locally. In our plans, like I said, we are planning to admit we start in 2 weeks the English language proficiency, followed by the state summative assessment.
So, sir, basically what you're saying is the reason we're not going to do the test, let's call it a late test rather than an early test. We're not going to test a fifth grader at the fourth grade level because what I hear you saying is you know they're going to fail and you don't want to subject them to that.
That is not what I said.
Is that what it about amounts to? If not, why can't we go ahead and give the test late rather than
that is not what I said. We don't not give a test because we think a kid's going to fail. We give a test because we think it's an appropriate time to measure learning. And August was not the appropriate time to measure learning for a fifth grader on a fourth grade assessment that was going to be administered 6-8 months after they would have learned the material. So it's the appropriateness of the assessment.
Okay, I guess we'll just disagree on that. Madam Chair, I would say we should probably look at some sort of way to find out where we are today rather than wait until the spring to take the test to find out that what we already are guessing and what we know. Thanks. I'm done with that.
Thank you, Representative Tarwater. We'll work with the Department of Education and the State Board and see if we can get a better understanding of where our districts are, especially our districts that are remote or have been predominantly remote. So it looks like we did have a couple hands shoot up. Representative Huber, and then the last one, Representative Estes, for a follow-up question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm looking at the instructional delivery chart, and I have 3 grandchildren in the Gardner-Edgerton School District 231, and it's listing on that chart that they're all on site. But I know my elementary grandson is on site, but the other 2 with middle school and high school haven't had 1 minute of on-site instruction. It's all been remote. So my question is, are we doing any kind of auditing even when you're putting together a chart like this to see is it accurate? And I would like to just have a follow-up even with Gardner-Edgerton District on why they're listing everything is on site both at the beginning of the school year and then in October, and find why that is kind of misleading where it's not showing it as remote.
Thank you, Representative Hubert. You're correct. Gardner-Edgerton is working with our folks who sent the survey out right now to determine where the mistake was made about how we got that reported on their report. In terms of auditing, yes, we audit every district every year, and the format that the districts are in is a part of the audit that will happen this year. So that will take place. Thank you for asking about that, so we can clarify a little bit. And Madam, I'm sorry.
I would just like a follow-up even to find out how that happened, and then why, again, I just talked to my grandson, and he said the school board basically said they have no plans to even look at returning to a hybrid, or any type of other than remote learning at this time, anytime in the near future. And so, again, we're almost, 5 months into a school year with not a single second of, other than remote learning for those kids. And that's just unacceptable. So I would just like a follow-up, maybe send me an email on what you find out and what can be done to help get the information corrected and help those kids to get at least some in-person instruction, especially the special education and at-risk kids that are just slipping through the cracks. Thank you.
I'll certainly follow up with that, Representative Hubert, and find out where that mistake was made. And
thank you.
Madam Chair, if I can stray for just a minute, I apologize, but I've been remiss in identifying our superintendents. In addition to Dr. Anderson from Topeka, we also have Dr. Lewis from the Lawrence Public Schools, and I didn't want to leave him out. I apologize.
Yes, and we actually have Dr. Anthony Lewis on our list of WebEx guests, so welcome, Dr. Lewis. Do we also have a Dr. Alicia Thompson with us?
She was originally scheduled to, but has not been able to join us today.
Okay, and so then at this point, we're going to, Representative Estes, can you hold your question for just a few minutes? We'll go to Dr. Tiffany Anderson, Superintendent of Topeka Public School, and then you get the first question, which is either to Dr. Anderson, or we can circle it back to Craig or Brad. Would that work? Dr. Tiffany Anderson, you have the floor.
Thank you so much. And I know we were scheduled to start at 3:30, so I do have a 5 o'clock that I may have to go to. If I can't get that rescheduled, do forgive me in advance. I'm excited to be here. And Madam Chair, I just almost said, amen. I'm the daughter of a pastor when you start talking about poverty and ESOL and the importance of making sure kids are back in school. Look, I tend to say that, if you can play ball, you can be in school. If we can do sports, we can be in school. And so we've really worked hard to make sure that that happens in ways that it can, but also understanding the reality of the pandemic. And I'm going to give you a few stats, a little bit of resources, and then just open it up to questions for you. If he hadn't mentioned Dr. Lewis, I was sure going to mention him, that I wouldn't be the only one here talking. We have 2 different districts. Topeka, 73% free lunch. Topeka has certainly a large ESOL population. We are one of the only places, certainly in the region, with a bilingual K-12 program, elementary, middle, and high. We have a bilingual school and all of those in terms of dual language programming. And we certainly have an international school. So we have a variety of individuals who really rely on school in order to get their basic needs met. Now, that being said, I'll share with you, I don't want to assume that you kind of know how we approach this. I'm going to really focus on remote. Now, no good person shows up without their team. So my team members that are on here is to answer, and I shouldn't say that, not no good person shows up without their team, but I don't show up without my team, because anything that you ask, I want to be able to say, I don't want to have to say, I'm going to get back to you. So I've just tried to kind of pull a few people on here that might be helpful. Now, the initial part of this, the individual that spoke and talked about how the curriculum was created and the remote learning platform, we were fortunate, and some of our staff in Topeka helped plan some of that curriculum and remote learning platform, and was on some of the PBS specials of how do you teach when we were closed in March and April and May. And so Ms. Wallace, my assistant superintendent, she's on with me. She's going to try to share the screen and bring up a PowerPoint so you guys have some handy information to have with you. I did email it to Roger, so you have some of this information as well. In addition, I also have the Deputy Superintendent on as well, Mr. Larry Robbins, and the Director of Demographics, who manages really all of our assessments. So having heard some of the questions, I may stray a little bit from that PowerPoint. Ms. Wallace, can you share, or they may have to give you co-hosting as well so that you can share. In the interest of time, I'm going to talk relatively fast so I can stop and answer questions. I have to say, I come from a family of educators, and Mr. Tarwater, you sound like one of my family members, because we come from a long line of the idea that you can't wait to the end of the year to assess. And I don't think KSDE does that. I think one of the things that they've encouraged for superintendents to do is to give formative assessments frequently in an ongoing way. Therefore, I've been in Topeka 5 years. We introduced an electronic platform when I first started. It's one many states have used. And so in Topeka, we were using something called Mastery Connect. The benchmark assessments that KSDE has, we actually use those and we created formative assessments from that. And then from those formative assessments, really our staff every week, they have some level of formative assessment opportunity. And so that's really allowed us to have a predictor before we ever take the test. And so we can really predict, is a student proficient or not? And let's not wait till they're not proficient to say, how do we catch up and how do we remediate? That also helped us open up our summer school programming that we started about 4 years ago. As I continue to share a little bit, Roger, I think you're on the line. Mrs. Wallace can't seem to share that PowerPoint. I don't know if you can help her on the back end or either pull it up on your end. But if she has that co-hosting, she'll try to share the PowerPoint with you to give you some specifics. So here's what it looks like in Topeka. When we started, we felt strongly that we needed to create a platform where all of our students, all of our elementary students, we have about 13,183 students, all of those students should be able to begin school 5 days a week, okay, at least at the elementary level. We know that the economic gap, I believe, is perpetuated by the poverty gap, is perpetuated by not being able to read, not be able to do math. Therefore, it's really important to make sure we get our kids in the buildings, being able to be in buildings 5 days a week, full day, not a hybrid, but in schools. And so that's how we started. But we really use that month of August to really revamp some programming, some space utilization, staffing, reassigning staff who previously were called coaches or were doing some other things in the district. Counselors, all of those. And we opened something called micro schools, which we studied over the course of the summer. So in person, we started with in person in that space. The secondary was a little bit more tricky in that they started off in a remote environment that gave us time to also revamp their space as well. And so once we started the elementary 5 days a week, starting in September, right after Labor Day, we then brought in the secondary second. And so our 6 through 12 program, they came in half day. Now, we're not here to talk about in person, so I won't spend a lot of time on that. But I want you to know that's how we started. So 6 through 12, they came in half day, starting at 7:30. They spent up until lunchtime. And then when 12 o'clock they left, they had lunch. The 12 o'clock group came. Our 11:30 group came, and then they stayed until 3:30, and then they took breakfast with them home in the evening to eat at home. And then, that's really how we served everyone throughout the week. Wednesday is a day for small group and tutoring. Okay. Now, once the community spread for our district in Shawnee County reached a red level for consecutive weeks, just the level of staffing alone with approximately 2,500 staff members was quite the challenge to be able to manage. So therefore, we initially tried to put webcams in classrooms, and as teachers were quarantined, utilizing those in the classrooms. But eventually, our sub vendor didn't have subs. We really had a challenge being able to keep everyone in the buildings. Therefore, remote learning. Now, remote learning has continued really all year because, in part, we have some parents, and our demographic persons is on as well, some parents who really preferred and were afraid to send their children to school is reality. Some parents who had children who were medically fragile, and so they've been remote throughout. And so we really asked our parents to elect if they wanted to be remote or not. With those families, so we've had remote all year. And so our remote learning platform, I'll have Ms. Wallace share a little bit about some of the tools that we use, but our teachers really use the instructional time guidelines from KSDE. We expect our teachers to have a small classroom size. We expect them to have an engaging experience. We do home visits remotely. We give assessments remotely, but we were already doing that the last 3 or 4 years. And so that's not new, giving assessments remotely for us each week. So we've continued to do that, and we're doing our benchmark assessment remotely. Some of the other larger standardized assessments we have some challenge with, but our normal formative assessments we've been doing. With that, the remote learning piece that we have provided includes social emotional support. Our counselors are giving support. And here's the challenge that we're finding, especially in a high poverty environment, is that the number of things that go on in a home outside of school and babysitting and all of the other things that our young people are experiencing when they're not at the building has a mental health impact that is rather significant. The higher poverty, the higher the impact appears to be from what we're able to track. So we've really encouraged our staff to do home visits, and all of our parents or teacher staff are doing remote learning visits as well. Even as late as 8 o'clock at night, our counselors are actually giving counseling sessions remotely. So we're doing both of those. Now, all of that being said, in the evening, we call it twilight school. Whether you're remote or not, you can come on to school. So we actually open our doors up on the weekends, in the evenings, in the mornings, and throughout the week. And so we provide small group one-on-one tutoring for our special ed, our occupational therapy students, as well as our gen ed students. So here's some data to provide for you. And again, we'll see if we can still, I see Ms. Wallace is now the co-host, so she may still be able to bring up that PowerPoint. I know for this committee, data is a huge piece that you'll want to look at. So if we can pull it up, we will. If we can't, I'm just going to turn it over to Ms. Wallace, my teammate, to talk about curriculum. She oversees the curriculum department. Ms. Wallace, do you want to share a little bit about the instructional platform based on things that I haven't said? And then in terms of data, I'll just speak a little bit to what the percentage of pass rate, just based on Representative Estes's question, and some of the other questions. I'll just speak to what it looks like in Topeka. But let me say to you, what we've said is whether you are remote or not, you will learn, and it's up to us to make sure that you have an experience that is meaningful, no matter where you are. So that being said, now that the PowerPoint is up, as Ms. Wallace kind of goes to that very next slide, and we've talked about some of these pieces, the first two slides are really about that instructional piece. And so as she goes to those next couple of slides, jumping to that instructional piece, I'll turn it over to Ms. Wallace. Ms. Wallace, do you want to share a little bit about, and maybe Roger's managing the slide. I'm not sure who's moving to the next slide pieces, but Ms. Wallace, I'll turn it on over to you to talk about professional development.
Absolutely. And thank you for sharing the slides for me. So yes, really, we have continued on the path that we would have if we were in person during remote learning as it relates to professional development. We have monthly or bi-monthly data consults with every school where we look at formative assessment data. We have a remote learning observation tool that provides principals with very specific things to look at, as well as we've created a virtual PD website for both last spring's professional development days, our new staff orientation. We offered a very full menu of courses and sessions to take last summer, and then again for pre-service. And that is available and in an ongoing kind of way, as well as having 2 nights of the month, we offer extended professional development for our staff. We have curriculum listening tours that both Dr. Anderson and I participate in, along with allowing teachers to have peer observations. It's one of the things that has been a benefit for the online learning is that our lessons that teachers are providing are being videotaped, and it allows other teachers to see really what model learning looks like, or model teaching. We've been able to provide plethora of online digital resources for our families that we've also provided professional development on, as well as ensuring that our staff and teachers have hotspots. We also have a partnership with Cox Cable that allows students who are on free and reduced lunch status to have Cox Cable free of charge to them. And then one of the things that we provided to all of our students this year in K-8 or PK-8 would be learning toolkits. They've included everything from whiteboards to math and science manipulatives, art supplies, texts, And one of the things I think our teachers really rose to the occasion on, particularly at elementary, was creating model video lessons. So we have some of our highest performing teachers creating video lessons and putting them on Seesaw for other teachers to access, but also broadcasting those on our TPS channel. And then Dr. Anderson went through several of the supports and things that we have in place for social emotional learning. But we have continued to gather and collect that data. We use the SSR or the SRSSIE to collect that social emotional data in our partnership with Dr. Lane through KU. We also do the Kansas Communities that Care Survey to collect that data as well. So data collection for social emotional supports is very much in place.
So really quickly, just on the interest of time, as we get through, Ms. Wallace just talked about a lot of these remote learning platforms. We're going to go on to the very next slide because this gets into the data. Now, I do want to say that the state, while they may not have given a state assessment, there is data out there related to attendance, failure rate in terms of just grades, graduation rate, and I can share with you just a little bit of where we were at the end of last year, just from the questions that came up, and that's why I'll stray a little bit. We're going to go to the very next slide for whomever's controlling the slideshow. Thank you for that, and then the very next slide after that as well. So let's talk a little bit about data. Our demographics person, Dr. Kip, is also on. He's done just a great job. I wanted you just to compare in-person versus remote, just as a small snapshot for you. If we look at elementary, and in fact, since Dr. Kip is here for my teammate, Dr. Kip, do you want to speak to this slide very quickly and briefly, and then we'll go to the very next slide?
Sure, thank you. Yeah, basically the green bars represent in-person students as the district, and the blue bars represent remote kids. So as you can see, there is a slight 1% drop at the elementary level from last year to this year. And then at secondary, there's actually a slight increase. We have gotten feedback that a lot of our secondary kids have anecdotally actually enjoyed remote, having that kind of independent work and autonomy to do some of that work. If they have a job, they could do some of this on the weekends and things like that.
So kind of moving from there, the next one, and then I wanted you to kind of look at a little bit about just January, from this point last year to this point this year. Dr. Kip?
Yes, if we want to compare apples to apples here, so we pulled the data from January 2020 and wanted to see how that compared to January 21. And there is actually a slight dip, but again, any attendance rates over 90% are really actually pretty decent, pretty good.
So as we move to the very next piece, we're going to just talk about failure rate, and this is just literally Fs in terms of grades. Dr. Kip?
Yeah, as Dr. Anderson mentioned, we're looking at a number of metrics locally that the state really does not have immediate access to. So one of these metrics is failure rates. We look at the number of Fs. At last year in 2019-20, we had about an 8.5% failure rate across the district. Looking at that same time frame as of this year to date, we're at 9.8. So it is slightly higher, but still that's almost 90% of the kids passing their courses.
So as we pull, and then the next couple of slides are about funds, and then I'll just kind of stop there in terms of just going back into coming to the full screen and answering any questions that you have. And I won't speak to the funds. You can kind of see the funds that we've received. I'm going to go ahead and take the slide on off. And we have our team member on here to talk about funds. It's interesting when you talk about the funding, and we'll move the slide totally off so we can see everybody on the screen. Thank you, team in the background on the House side that managed the PowerPoint, Roger or whomever's on your team. Thank you for doing that. I appreciate that. And so as we open this back up to the full group so we can see everyone, that funding piece is interesting because it really doesn't really speak to the message of all the things. We look at the funding, We've had to, not just handle remote issues, but also PPE equipment and other related matters. So I won't really go much into that unless you have questions. I'm going to stop there just to kind of conclude with the piece of, it is possible to ensure that students do well, but it does require this very holistic approach in the sense of, for us, our attendance rate is in part because we have a rule prior to COVID and even after COVID. If you're absent 2 days without parent contact, you will have a home visit. We don't have to wait 5 days or 10 days or whatever. If I don't see my kids for 2 days and we haven't had parent contact, it does require for us to have follow-up. Now, the state KSD has done a phenomenal job with giving us a variety of resources to really help kids catch up. Some families have the child is at daycare and they just can't do remote at daycare with the number of kids at daycare. Therefore, we set up a schedule so that they can do some of the work outside. Our teachers also have some alternative schedules. It takes a level of creativity, but we can say that we've been able to manage that in ways because we have to. Our kids are depending on it. Right now, our kids did come back in January. The COVID numbers were at a high red rate. Our board would like to see us in an orange rate, but they were gracious in giving me the opportunity to bring back students because we really wanted to make sure we checked in after the break. We wanted to make sure kids were doing okay before they moved back into remote for a few weeks until we're back at that orange space. And we're looking back at when we bring our kids back, it's really everyone, K through 12, pre-K through 12, actually. And even when we're in remote, every school still has a group of students that are still coming by bus to school just because the needs are such that the only way they can access all of what they need is at school. If we can do anything to push legislatively things that need to come forward, we have got to get broadband in Topeka. Anyone that is remote right now can see the equity gap is perpetuated by not having broadband throughout the state in ways that we need to. And I believe people are pushing that forward, but I can't speak enough about that. I'll stop there and turn the floor back over to you, Madam Chair. And thank you all for allowing myself and my colleague to be here with you today.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Anderson. We appreciate the presentation. We realize you'll have to step away at 5 o'clock, and generally we finish up by 5. If we don't finish our discussion, we'll try to work out a time to come circle back. I do want clarification, though. You say your kids are remote or in person right now, or hybrid?
Right now, the majority of our students are remote this week and last week. Once the county scorecard went to 24, our school board did allow me to keep our students in for that full week. And with that number remaining at a high red rate, we moved everyone the majority of folks into remote. And our board is most comfortable with all students being back in when we are at an orange rating. So we're really pushing for the vaccinations because whether we're red or orange or whatever color, I would like to have the opportunity to just bring everyone back and feeling as though anyone that needs the vaccination has that. The quarantines alone would have prevented us from being in anyway after those first 2 weeks. And the number of staff being out. So we are all remote this week, and we were remote last week.
Okay, so I'm sure the committee has several questions. I don't see hands up at the moment. Yes, I do see a hand, and I also have some questions, and we'll try to get this moving along. Representative Hoffman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll be real quick. The one graph that you had that was the vertical graph that showed remote and in person, I think, and they were both at 90%. Can you explain that again? Because that doesn't make sense that they're both at 90%.
Yes, sir. Dr. Kipp, do you want to talk a little bit about, I think you're talking about the attendance graph, possibly, Representative Hoffman, and without trying to pull the screen back up since someone else is managing the PowerPoint, Dr. Kipp will speak to the 90%ers. But I think you're talking about attendance. Dr. Kipp?
Okay. Okay. So that was not the percentage of your students at remote or in person. That was the attendance of the two different groups.
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
Okay, all right, I understand now. All right, thank you for that clarification. Thank you, Madam Chair.
And to follow up with that question, that seems pretty incredible considering you have broadband challenges and kids have all kinds of challenges at home trying to connect with their teachers. So when you say attendance rate, is that based on in being present at one class period a day, being online 4 hours a day? How many hours a day are your 6 through 12 remote students online in order to be counted at 92% attendance rate?
so I'll turn it over to Ms. Wallace to kind of share this within the team and talk about hours in the day of how much they have to spend. But I will tell you how we do this as well. We have the partnership with Cox Cable, in which we actually fund the monthly bill for Cox Cable, the $10 a month for families. And so we fund that for them through a grant. And that grant has now ended. So we'll really have to continue to look at how do we manage this long term. We also purchased hotspots and gave those to our families. And honestly, we had to give them to teachers too, because of broadband. So we provided those as well. And then we put hotspots on buses. We also gave out a map that showed where all of the Wi-Fi spots are, including our parking lots at our schools. And so when kids are in the building, they're actually able to upload assignments, go home, do them. And anytime they come back to the parking lot or whatever Wi-Fi area or turn on their hotspot, that assignment will automatically be uploaded. So that gives you technique. Now, in terms of hours, Ms. Wallace, do you want to speak to that? And then certainly Dr. Kipp can jump on in.
Yes. So in grades 6 through 12, students log in through Zoom synchronously every day to each of their classes. So if they have 8 classes a day, as soon as one class ends, another class is starting, and they synchronously Zoom in. If for some reason they can't attend on a given day, if they've completed the work and or watched the video of the class and or both, we can count them present as participating. And so that has helped some of our students who perhaps come asynchronously because of a lack of internet on any given day.
So for clarification, you are saying that 92% of your 6 through 12 graders are spending 6 hours a day online.
They start and meet every day in class. The teacher presents the lesson. They may go into a breakout room with other kids. They may have a little bit of independent work time, but they are engaged in learning and learning activities for the same number of instructional hours a day that we would if we were in person. So some of that time is spent independently. Sometimes some of it is in breakout rooms with other students, and some of it is in direct instruction lessons over Zoom with their teachers.
Okay, well, that's pretty incredible. In terms of the failure rate, that failure rate, is that based on, for example, I think you said 9% of the students are failing, which is a little bit worse than the previous year. Is that failing one class? Is that failing the grade? What is that measurement?
I love that question, Dr. Kipp. As we get to 4:52, I'm going to stay, but I know Dr. Williams just wants to, Dr. Lewis wants to talk as well. And so I don't know if there'll be time left for him. But Dr. Kipp, do you want to speak to that?
Yes. It's basically counting the proportion of any F in any subject. So that could be, the core reading and math, or it could be some elective course as well. I'm including all those courses in that number.
Okay, so I just want to let you know that just sounds crazy low, because from my school district where kids are in school all the time, it's jumped 12%. So you're saying your remote kids are doing better, and that's a really interesting, and it comes back, to the idea that grading and graduation can be very, very subjective. So I'm not sure what that number is actually saying, but it's actually concerning to me, because it seems extremely low when you're talking about a large number of students that are at risk. But I guess what we will do is we will find out that, you said you have 73% of your students that are at risk or free lunch. I guess we'll find out when the state assessments come how well USD 501 is doing, because that number is really, 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 really low.
Yeah, and Madam Chair, you know what? And I'm going to be teaching preschool tomorrow. I just want you to come and visit Topeka. I mean, I really do, no matter what grade level you're coming to, because part of this really is, the assessments, and this is my own personal belief about standardized assessments. I think standardized assessments gives you one picture, and I'm speaking to you from a Black woman who I can tell you if I take a standardized assessment and I take a class and a course and I take a formative assessment, I may get 3 different readings from that, in part because of the manner in which a standardized assessment may be given. We have had students that have come right out of remote and they take a formative assessment. They stay in school for a week or 2. They get social emotional support. They take that same assessment or one that's very similar to it, and they do very different on that assessment. So I will tell you right now that a standardized assessment over the course of learning where you've been in and out of remote certainly will not have the same level of to me, results that you would have if you were in person at all times. I suspect that Topeka previously, the manner in which we've done in 2018 and 19 will likely be similar in any standardized assessment coming forward. Because right now, what we're doing in remote is really wrapping our hands around the level of staff development that requires a great deal of project-based, a great deal of delivering teacher toolkits, home visits, tutoring. That's what this has to look like right now, because in a high free lunch environment, it's really required. Even with remote right now, our preschool is in all day in the middle of the housing projects. So it really, so when I say the majority are remote, but we've had to open up our classroom at the rescue mission because we have 400 families that are considered homeless based on the McKinney-Vento. So, but I would welcome and would love for you to just spend a little time with me or Ms. Wallace or any team member and see how this works, because it really, for a district that has 73% free lunch, much like the 2-day attendance policy, we've had to really make sure we wrap our arms around kids, because if we don't, we're going to lose them. And our increased graduation rate, our ACT rate, it's still not where we want it to be, but those areas that have increased, I contribute in part to some of these level of services that, continued despite the remote.
Well, I was just going to say that that's great compared to the numbers that we're hearing reported in other communities of Kansas, as well as other states, because like I said, your numbers are entirely different and stand out. I know that you do need to go. I know we have others that do have questions, but you won't be able to answer them. Dr. Anthony Lewis may have already stepped out. Dr. Anthony Lewis, apologies that we did not get to you. Apologies that our format in remote is difficult. It's hard to pace and to know how quickly we can get from one topic to the other, and we didn't give everyone the amount of time. Dr. Anderson, we could spend hours talking on this subject with you. So I want you to give you a moment to give any closing thoughts, and then we'll let you guys exit. And then I'm going to ask committee whatever questions they have. We're going to direct them back to Craig and Brad. And then hopefully, if given another opportunity, we'll be able to talk again, as well as Dr. Anthony Lewis. We are, like I said, going to have an informational hearing on remote learning next week. So for those that we didn't get time with, maybe next week we can see if you are available.
Thank you. I don't have closing comments. It's 4:58. Other than thank you so much.
All right, thank you. Committee, I'm going to take any questions that you might have. Representative Estes, it's your turn.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I was just going to say I really appreciate what Dr. Anderson said about what her expectations of the standardized test scores are. I don't think they're that different than mine. What my thought process is we've gone through a time period like none other in our lifetime. And I think just my purpose in wanting to bring the standardized testing forward is it gives us a snapshot, because the formatives and the interims, I do not believe are collected by the State Department of Education. And I'm a newbie, so I could be wrong on that. And so that therefore we, and the state board don't have that picture so that we can begin to figure out how do we best support everybody? How do we course correct, and how do other districts learn the best practices of others? That's all my comments. Thank you so much.
Okay, Representative Johnson, you had a question earlier. Did you want to ask that question or hold off?
I would dearly love to go to that preschool tomorrow. Is that possible? I love working with those.
Look, you said you used to teach. Now, look, if you're looking for a teaching or a subbing, you can sub with me anytime, Representative Johnson. Hey, look, I'll be teaching for a brief period in reading in preschool, but if we could offline, just connect. Yes. And then just have you visit some other classes as well. Thank you so much for even having an interest in doing that.
Yes, ma'am, I'll call offline.
That's great. That's great. Anyone else? Committee, any further questions? I realize that this is a big topic, and there's no way we can get to all the questions and issues and, positives, negatives, challenges in one session. So I do thank everyone for their patience. Be thinking about those things that you would like more information regarding, and just write those down, share them. And this conversation doesn't end today, it continues on. So if I'm going to ask my Vice Chair, Representative Hoffman, is there anything else that we're missing?
I don't believe so. I think we covered that fairly well.
Okay. Well, with that, committee, we will adjourn, and we will see you tomorrow at 3:30. So have a great evening. We are adjourned.